right off the bat, feels quite a bit more stable than my previous fork. I really like how composed it is in the turns. It's not quite as twitchy. In terms of how the trail feels, I do feel like it's improved over my last fork. The issue I had with, well, what I felt with my last fork with 51 millimeters of offset is when cornering, especially when it's dusty and loose like this, the front kind of wants to drift out on me, which, I don't know, everybody has their own term for it, which to me is kind of a low side. This definitely feels quite a bit more planted, and this is way drier than when I last rode this trail. Dustier, looser. So even in suboptimum conditions for this trail, I'm really liking the difference that the 44 mil offset is bringing. Straight line speed. It's a bit more stable, wants to hold a line easier. And also, I feel like the front end, just in the middle of those turns, it wants to hold its line better. You're not kind of like fighting a twitchy front end at all. Oh, so dusty. But so overall, I'm liking the differences this is making. And we'll kind of talk more in detail about it after I'm done. But thumbs up.
Hey everybody, it's Andrew here, and today we are talking about fork offsets for your mountain bike. But before we get going, I just want to say thank you guys for being patient and holding on, patiently waiting for some videos. It's been about a month since I posted. Fell sick for about a couple weeks, and it just took a very long time to recover from that, but I feel pretty good now, just kind of back to my normal self. So we're going to get right back to where we left off, and I've been promising a video about fork offset. Now, let me preface this by saying that I'm not a geometry expert, not a mathematician, but I'm going to tell you, basically, in my opinion, the effects of what less fork offset on my Hightower LT has done for me. So let's start with the bike. This is my Hightower LT. Normally comes with a 150 millimeter fork. This Fox 36 is 170. Now, that was kind of a conscious decision to get the orange and the less fork offset. You had to buy it at 170. You can't put an air shaft for 160, but I'm giving that a go to see if I really need to do that. This specific Fox fork has a 44 millimeter crown. Most 29er forks are a 51 millimeter offset crown. So let's talk about fork offset for a second and what it does. So I think a year and a half or so ago, Transition came out with this very visible campaign about their SBG geometry and how they designed their bikes specifically for less fork offset, and the translation that made to the riding characteristics. A lot of that's a little smoke and mirrors, but we'll kind of dive into what those changes they made might have been because of fork offset. So the Hightower LT stock 150 comes in at about, I think it's in the 66-ish head angle range, and about, I think, a mid 63-ish seat tube angle. So let's dive into what what less fork offset will do to your bike. If you were wanting to purchase one of these forks, whether it's a Lyric with the 42 millimeter offset or the Fox 36 with the 44 millimeter offset, this is what I believe will be the physical and the riding differences that'll happen to your bike. So, less fork offset basically means your fork stanchions are going to be either inline, forward, even behind of your center, which we will call your steerer. So more fork offset will move your stanchion, tubes, everything else more forward from center. Less fork offset will move it less distance from center or less offset. So this affects a thing called trail, which I'm sure you have read tons of editorials, videos on, and do you really still understand trail? So I'm not going to get into the really technical things. I'm here about what's real, what's physical, what I felt. So, all right, so let's see what less fork offset does. So you move the fork stanchions back. So imagine a horizontal line. Since everything is at an angle, when you, on the same bike, assuming you're going with the same model fork with the same axle to crown, when you move your fork stanchions back or have a reduced offset, because everything is at an angle, it's a horizontal, it's actually going to slacken out your head angle a little bit more. Because if we move those back, you're moving these fork stanchions closer to you, but since it's at a decreasing angle, it's actually going to, if you go on the line, it's actually going to put the bottom of your tire below that horizontal line. So to make everything even again, you gotta pop that front end up. Your front end's gonna be a little bit slacker. On the opposite effect, if you're going from a certain offset to more, you're pulling the stanchions away from you, so your front center is increasing. But because you're at an increasing angle, when you increase that offset on that horizontal line, it's going to create a gap under your tire in that line. So then you plane it out, then it actually becomes a little bit steeper. So on the same frame, nothing else changes. Reducing offset will affect on its own whether your head angle is slacker or steeper. You may have heard in my little ride demo with this fork that it really felt like things slowed down. The closest thing that I can relate to you is it felt very similar, like going from 27.5 to 29. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just a different feeling and sensation. So from 27.5 to 29, things felt a little bit slower, the bike felt a little bit more stable, the bike wanted to stay upright more. It was different to corner in. One can say it's harder to corner in. I will say it just requires a little bit more effort and a different riding style. 29ers and 27.5 require slightly or more dramatic motor inputs to kind of ride the bike how you similarly would between the two. So the best way I can convey on how less or more offset feels, at least in my opinion, and how I felt, is similarly going from that 27.5 to 29 and back wheel size. Now, I much prefer how the less fork offset feels. To me, it feels less twitchy. So in the corners where it's a hard corner, and sometimes you feel like you overturn or it's less twitchy to be stable, I find that less fork offset really let me make those corners smoother. But the opposite effect, or the other thing that I also noticed too, is I was staying higher in the turns because the bike wasn't turning as fast at least for me. I definitely noticed I was staying higher in the turn, which you can say produces a softer or less dramatic arc. So it's more distance traveled, but I very much preferred how the bike felt cornering. Now let's look at climbing. Honestly, I don't feel a whole lot different climbing. If someone's preaching that it's a dramatic effect, I honestly don't feel it. Maybe I just don't climb as much as other people do, so I don't notice it. But if you are a regular earn your descents by virtue of climbing, you don't seek the most technical things to climb, I would be very hard pressed for you to feel a difference between fork offset. There's maybe a little in there, but it's not enough to kill a ride or scream home about it. All right, so let's talk about whether it's a good idea for you to have less fork offset on your bike that wasn't designed for it. I had a lot of people that I shared this idea with, and they're like, well, your bike wasn't designed for it. Well, maybe so, but does it truly have to be designed for it? So let's go back and talk about what fork offset did. So on this same bike, if I was a bike designer, we take a frame, we take what's stock, 150 millimeter on the Hightower LT, 51 millimeter offset, and we say, what happens when we, A, reduce fork offset, or B, reduce fork offset and add more travel, let's say to maybe 160. So again, we're moving the orientation of the rest of the fork to the center, which we will call the crown or the steer back. It's going to slacken the head angle a little bit, and then we added 10 millimeters of travel, or maybe we didn't, and it slackens it out even more. Well, what does that do? Well, obviously it'll slacken out your C-tube angle, because those angles are pretty much fixed to each other. It's going to shorten your reach. I guess we could say it might shorten your top tube a little bit as well. So those are pretty much all the things Transition lengthened in their SBG geometry. They lengthened the reach. I don't think they tried to lengthen the top tube much. If anything, the top tube grew shorter because the C-tube angle got slacker. So they definitely lengthened the reach, which is from bottom bracket forward, and then they steepen the C-tube angle to lengthen out that cockpit a little bit. So those are kind of the trinity of things that Transition did, was offset, reach, C-tube angle. Those are kind of the things that they preached. Other than that, it's pretty much the same bike. On paper, I really do have a very slack C-tube angle, but when you're sagged into your bike, it doesn't feel a whole lot different. So those are the effects of why bikes these days are designed the way they are around less fork offset. Just that primarily is because that's what's going to happen when you go from 51 to 44 or 42. That's a lot of information to kind of take in. This was more, I wanted this video to be more of like almost like a question and answer or open forum. Again, I don't profess to be an expert in any of this, fork offset, bike geometry, any of it. I know what I literally see and what makes sense to me. So if there's something that doesn't make sense to you in my explanation, please let me know. I am more than happy to have conversations with everybody around this topic, and just more general questions about how it felt riding. So what's coming up? So I actually today leave for a 2-week trip to Korea. When I get back, there's definitely at least a couple bikes that I really want to demo before winter sets. So I've got a couple of those lined up, and then we'll continue on the conversation. I'm doing a bike check 3.0 about what this is. So again, I really appreciate you guys hanging around for the month or so that there's been some idle time and no posts. It really just helps motivate me to keep things going. So If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, and we'll see you guys next time.